Hi, I'm Pat McLeod.
And I am Tammy McLeod.
Just this past weekend, a friend of mine said to me, we are all just a phone call, a knock on the door, or a virus away from our lives and even the whole world changing in ways that we don't want. We received our own life changing, dreaded phone call about 13 years ago.
Before we tell you about that, let us introduce you to our family. This is a photo of us with our 4 children a year before that phone call when we took them away for a weekend in the mountains and told them that we were going to take them to South Africa that summer. This was 2007 when the HIV/AIDS pandemic was raging in South Africa. We wanted to take a team of Harvard students to South Africa to see if there were any ways that we might be able to help to come alongside people in underserved communities.
While we were there, we would spend our days with kids. In fact, that was the one year that we worked with children who were in a disabled children's home. And then at night we would gather together in our group, and we would do some teaching and some training on spiritual formation and ministry. And our kids were there with us. Zach was in high school at that point, and we were only like halfway through the first week of the entire summer, and Zach came in late for the third time. And I waited around after the meeting and pulled Zach aside, and I was ticked off with him. And I basically said, Zach, you've been late for 3 meetings. What's going on? And he kind of smiled and shrugged it off. And basically, I forced out of him a confession that he had actually stayed behind at dinner to wash dishes. He snuck into the kitchen, and he just felt bad about the fact that these people who'd spent all this time preparing our meal were having to clean up after us. So he made a deal with them that he would do the dishes for the kitchen staff if they would teach him some of their worship songs. And so of course I felt bad for laying into him for doing something like that. And within a week, someone else had actually found out what he was doing and joined him. And by the end of that summer, the whole project was, elbowing their way into the kitchen to be a part of that event. And he turned this kitchen into a sanctuary, and this group of very independent individuals into a community and a place of, a task of the very mundane and dirty work of washing dishes into a way of worship. That was a glimpse into Zach.
While Zach was falling in love with South Africa, the female college students who were with us were falling in love with Zach and jokingly asking us for his hand in marriage. They wished that he would have been a few years older.
He had actually formed really close relationships, not just with the people on our team, but with the kids, especially the kids in the home for children with disabilities. And when we had come back to Boston, this was now a week before that dreaded phone call, Zach and I were in the kitchen, and we were reflecting back on our experience in South Africa and sharing, a laugh of a special memory and moment. And there was a pause, and then Zach, with a very serious look on his face, he turned to me and said, "Hey, Dad, I know this may sound weird, but I've wondered if God would ever have me become like one of them." And it was a weird comment, and I took it seriously, and I looked at him and said, Zach, if something ever happened to you and you did become like one of the children, we would love you the same way that we just love those kids, right? And he said, "Yeah, I know, Zach, Dad." And that was the end of a very peculiar and awkward conversation.
The morning of the day that we received the dreaded phone call, Zach, with his strong, lean body, hugged me and said as he ran out the door, "Goodbye, Peach, I love you." we had a very strong mother-son bond, but we also really had a deep spiritual bond. We would sing and play worship songs together with our guitars, and we would pray for each other and talk about our hopes and dreams for the future.
Yeah, and then later that night, Tammy and I were actually at the first large group meeting of the year for the campus ministry that we run in Boston. And if you can just imagine a room just filled with a couple hundred laughing, smiling college students who'd been away from each other all summer and were just happy to be together. It's kind of like a mosh pit in a concert. And all of a sudden, and by the way, we had one of our sons, Soren, with us. Our other son we had left at home to do homework, and then Zach himself was at a football practice or scrimmage, and our daughter Chelsea had already left for college. So all of a sudden, my conversation with a student was interrupted by another student who came up behind me and said, "Your son's trying to reach you," when she handed me her phone. And it was the panicked voice of my son, Nate, on the other end of the line saying, "Dad, why have you not been answering your phone?" He was obviously panicked, and I exited the room to try to hear him better and see what he said. He said, "Dad, parents have been calling, coaches have been calling, now the hospital is calling. Zach's been hurt. He collapsed on the football field and he's being airlifted to a hospital, and they need to talk to you right now because they may have to do an emergency brain surgery and they need your permission." And within seconds, we were racing down Massachusetts Avenue to get to this hospital that we'd never been before. And when we got there, they basically met us at the door, ushered us to the pre-op room. There Zach was unconscious, still in his football garb, actually intubated. And they explained to us that he had suffered a traumatic brain injury and that they were going to have to open up his skull cap and cauterize some vessels and evacuate some blood from his cranium. And they said, this could result in anything from death to the fact, he could have a full recovery or anything in between. We need you to sign right here. And we did. We signed, and then they gave us a moment with Zach. We prayed for him, kissed him goodbye, and they wheeled him away. And 5 hours later, the nurse came and got us, took us to meet the surgeon who told us, we did what we could do. He's still alive. Now we just have to wait and see.
So Zach was in the ICU for 4 weeks. He had pneumonia and a lung surgery, and he lost a third of his body weight. Then he was transferred to a rehab hospital for 4 months, and there he learned to eat and sit and then stand and walk again finally. But he had very little short-term memory or speech. And the doctors said that he was so severely disabled that if we wanted him to have a really strong recovery, we should send him to a residential neuro rehab school. And at this rehab school, after about 6 months, it was really clear that Zach was not going to have a strong recovery. So I started reading books on grief, but I just wasn't connecting with them. And I think the reason was is Zach was alive. He didn't die, but he wasn't the same as he was before.
When Zach moved into that rehab hospital, he was, like Tammy said, like 110 pounds and just emaciated. He could hardly speak. He had been through a severe, not just the 2 brain surgeries, but a severe, pneumonia that almost took his life. And he was in rough shape. And they had actually given him this little pad that he could point to the letters on the pad as a way of trying to communicate with us. And on the second day that he was in that rehab hospital, he was trying to say something to us, and we couldn't understand what he was saying, and he couldn't eke it out. And so we got that little pad out and said, "Zach, just point to the letter you're trying to say." And he slowly eked out, and we started. It was like a charade game. He said, "Don't." And we're guessing what word he's trying to get out. We figure out it's don't, and then he said go, and we're like, "Don't go, don't worry, Zach, we're not going." But that's not what he was saying. He wanted to say more, and he kept going, and he eked out back, And we're like, don't go back what, Zach? It ended up that the sentence that he communicated to us was, don't go back to Africa without me. Wasn't going to tell that story, but that just came. Go ahead. Well, yeah, the thing I was supposed to tell you was that we did, upon the strong recommendation of a friend, we decided to start seeing a counselor early on in this process. And that created for us a safe place to connect, to talk about issues that were beginning to come up between us, because the different reactions we were having to Zach were torquing not just our relationship, but the relationships that we had with each of the kids. That was one misconception I had about this, about grief and about, traumatic brain injury and other losses like this, is that it doesn't just change the relationship that each individual has with the person who is been injured or who's suffering from some kind of debilitating illness, but it's everyone's relationship with everyone. Every person in the family's relationships had to be reworked and revised. And I can honestly say that every time we went into that counselor's office and every time we came out, I came out of that with an insight, with something that was really helpful.
I was in grad school and I decided to read a book on grief counseling and grief therapy that was recommended to me. And it was supposed to be the top book on the topic. And by the time I got to the end, it only had one sentence for us. People who have family members who are still here physically, but not the same cognitively and emotionally. And that sentence was, we need more understanding of this type of loss. And it was just so frustrating. So I couldn't find any books about our type of loss. I finally called the rehab hospital where Zach stayed. And I said, I want to do a research paper on the type of loss that we're dealing with, but I can't find the term to research. So the next day, the librarian emailed back papers from Pauline Boss. He said, the name of your type of loss is ambiguous loss. So I read Boss's articles, then I ordered her books and devoured them. Finally, someone understood what we were going through. Pauline Boss talked about two types of loss. The first is when you do not have the person physically, but psychologically they're still with you. So missing people due to war, terrorism, natural disasters, kidnapping, incarceration, divorce, adoption, immigration. And then the second type is what we're dealing with, where you still have the person physically, but psychologically they're not the same, emotionally and cognitively. So Alzheimer's disease or other dementia, traumatic brain injury, chronic mental illness, addictions like drugs, alcohol, and gambling.
I think another thing that Tammy taught me that was that came out in Pauline Boss's research was that the key to enduring and coping with ambiguous loss is that you have to learn to live well with both the having and the not having at the same time. And that proves to be a very difficult thing to do. Often people are only able to do one or the other, and sometimes neither. Well, and it's even more complicated when two people are dealing with the same loss, but one person is doing one and the other is doing the other. In other words, one person is completely obsessed with and doting over the son he still has, but living in complete denial about the son that he's lost. The other is treating the person that has been lost as if the person is dead, but and really grieving it appropriately, but failing to revise her attachment to the son she still has. That's basically our story, and kind of one of the themes that runs through Hit Hard.
According to Boss, ambiguous loss is the most stressful type of loss, not the worst, but the most stressful, because there's no linear process of letting go. Rarely is there acceptance, and there's never closure. On top of all that, ambiguous loss is rarely validated. And this is one of the reasons we wrote our book. we wanted to write the story we wished we would have had 1 year after Zach's injury and receiving that phone call.
Mm.
It's a story of a family dealing with ambiguous loss. It's a raw, honest story that reveals the way we struggled, our struggle to adjust, our feeling of mastery or our control in life, our struggle to revise our attachments, our struggle to try to be gentle with each other, our struggle to grieve. It's a story that will validate the pain of ambiguous loss and the torque that it puts on relationships.
So if you've not yet received that dreaded phone call or knock on the door, you can pretty much be sure that one day you will. We have all experienced a virus that has changed our lives in ways that we did not want it to. The point is that ambiguous loss is ubiquitous. It's everywhere right now. Hit hard, I think, does speak to what's become a universal experience in our lives. And like Tammy just said, it I think will validate the complicated emotions and reveal some of the difficult challenges that we experience when we're in the midst of an ambiguous loss, both individually and relationally. One thing I will say about stories that I have come to appreciate is the way that they take a person on an emotional journey that can actually surface and soften some of the hardest emotions that we have to deal with in life, and that stories can give us hope and they can help us make sense of and find meaning in the midst of our loss. I think in the end, I've come to believe that the small stories of loss that we experience do beg for a larger story that can make sense of them. And I certainly believe that Zach's life points us toward that story. And I hopefully Hit Hard will do that too in a way that will bless you.
And if you just want more resources in this area, you could see our website, patandtammymcleod.com. It's MCLEOD. We have a tab called Ambiguous Loss, and I wrote lots of articles that you could read there. We also wrote articles on the COVID Conversations tab that relates ambiguous loss to the pandemic and looks at those particular issues that we're dealing with right now. And our book is on Amazon, but on our website, we have lots of different places that you could get it. But we hope that our story gives you hope.
And I can't leave you hanging. I'm going to come back and finish that story. So about 3 years after Zach's recovery and he went to this rehab school, we finally decided it was time to take Zach back to Africa. And so we did, and we arranged, Tammy and I went early with Soren and Nate, and we had a friend of ours who was one of Zach's closest friends and knew him better than anyone, fly with him. And that was, still can't believe we let her do this, because that proved to be a pretty incredible challenge. And Zach, but it all was going very smoothly until halfway through the second flight, which was like a 13-hour flight, when Zach needed to go to the bathroom. She took him and she put him in there and let him alone for a while, and then tried to get in, but Zach had locked the door. And so she knocked and no response, knocked again, still no response. She started to panic because he'd been in there for about close to 10 minutes, and she was banging and yelling, and there was no response. And so she had to get the flight attendant, sorry, giving away the punchline here. She found the flight attendant who fortunately was able to break down the door or undo it without breaking down the door. And when they did, there was Zach just seated on the toilet with his head bowed in prayer. And Kat was like, "Zach, what are you doing?" And Zach didn't even bother, opening his eyes. He just sort of put his finger up like this, signaling 1 minute. He was basically having a little prayer time and didn't want to be interrupted. But that's our son, Zach, and that's a little vignette into the story of his loss and our journey into the world of ambiguous loss.